Welcome to the Christian Principles Podcast. On this episode, we are launching off a new series because we don't have enough series in this podcast. But with this one, we've talked about accreditation quite a few times, but we are making this series accreditation documentation because that is a huge part of the accreditation process and everything that you as a school leader are going to be required to accomplish. So we're starting off with this episode with the writing process. So let's get into that. The Christian Principles Podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. But bear in mind, the views and opinions expressed here are those of the hosts and not necessarily of the Herzog Foundation. Don't let limited budgets or IT staffing make your staff vulnerable to common cybersecurity attacks like phishing and social engineering. One of our past guests and friend of the pod, James, has offered 3 listeners' Christian schools 3 free virtual training sessions. These 45-minute video conferences will personally cover critical topics like email security, password best practices, and online safety and privacy. Email us at mark@christianprinciplespodcast.com and tell us why your school should be a part of these free sessions. All right, here we go. The writing process, the most, in my humble opinion, the most challenging part of accreditation. But we're gonna make it easy for everybody.
I gotta say, I do look at this part of the accreditation process with some measure of let's do it. I approach this with I'm pumped to write. I'm pumped to evidence to the world why this institution is the institution that everybody else should want to be like, or at least why this institution, praise God, has grown up to be what it would be. And you want to be prideful about these things, but you also don't want to walk into these with anything less than an expectation that your school should pass, should be able to prove these things, because if not, you shouldn't be starting this process anyway. Right. As we get talking about accreditation, though, I want to make sure that we note define some terms here. So when we talk about accreditation, we're talking about having a national organization come in and evidence to the population who would be looking at us, who we are working with, and to ourselves, all the stakeholders around us, that this institution is doing a exemplary job, or is doing a job at a level which we would say is appropriate for whatever organization that is. Now, on the podcast, we've talked a lot about ACSI, the Association of Christian Schools International. We've talked a lot about the AACS, the American Association of Christian Schools. Now, Matt, your school, Faith Baptist School in Salisbury, Maryland, it is an AACS member school.
It is.
I have experience with AACS schools and ACSI schools in my past. And largely speaking, these schools, as we're looking through the accreditation process, these accreditation processes are going to mirror many of the same, and we're going to hear this a lot today, standards. Now, Matt, when I hear standards, I don't want you to go into a pale fright. I don't want you to get sweaty. Because, yes, this is...
Huge problem.
It is a huge problem. No, we know that... We know that the writing of standards, and you'll hear us say that, like, again, let me back up. What is a standard? So a standard would be, if you go to acsi.org right now and you look up the Accreditation Documentation Certification, you can actually see, if you Google those words, you can see Standards and Indicators Checklist. And what would come up for you if you clicked on that would be the ACSI Inspire Standards Checklist. And literally, it's standard number 1, Mission, Beliefs, Foundations. Standard number 2, Spiritual Formation, Biblical Worldview Development. Standard number 3, Governance and School Leadership. And these standards are offered with a rubric and a description from the organization, which says, this is what we would expect the school to be able to prove they do. Well, AACS does the same thing. The American Association of Christian Schools does the same exact thing. Yep. And Matt, as you took your school, as you are taking your school through its first ever accreditation cycle, well, congratulations, first of all, on that. Well done. But
we hope well done.
Hope, yes.
We're still in the hope stage.
As you look at these for AACS, 12 standards.
12 standards, yep.
You then have to take those standards, of course, and evidence by writing not by recording on video, not by you will take people there. I know you want to do. I know it would be better.
That'd be great. Let me just get a microphone and tell you everything there is to know
all
about our
it.
school.
No, we have to write it down.
We have to write it down.
And really, if the school's done what it should do, what is being asked for is already available. And that's, part of the cycle of this self-improvement that comes with accreditation is if you're going to be accredited at a different, a higher and higher level or exemplary status or with merit or whatever it happens to be for the accrediting body you're working with, the actual standards will demand that you already have in place writing. You will have already codified certain things that you could then copy and paste into the standard description.
Yeah.
It's not always going to be the case. It might be difficult because you might not have done that previously. Right. But we're going to talk today, as Matt noted earlier, about the process of the writing. We're going to use future series parts to talk about the document gathering, to talk about the presentation of those documents, the beautiful, this is what we worked for, take a look at it. But today it's going to be the process of writing. So to do that, Matt, let's get specific. Where are you going to take us to review the process of writing the standards?
So before we can get into any kind of nitty gritty, I think you have to understand. You have to understand the expectation, right? What does the accrediting agency want to see from you concerning those standards? Okay, so for us, we're applying through AACS, and in their manual they give you kind of the rundown of each of those standards, breaking it up. You see all the sub points that support those standards, and then expectations for what you should be evidencing for each one. So I'm just going to kind of walk us through like an example. Standard 1 of AACS's standards is philosophy and mission, which ought to be the starting point of anything that we try to accomplish. And of course, you're going to be collecting all kinds of data to support whatever you are going to be claiming that your school does in this area. But there's 5 things, one being the collection of data, that you as a school need to kind of walk through. The second of those 5 things is writing a brief narrative describing the way each indicator is met. If not currently met, the response should indicate that. So I love that they just say 2 simple words, a brief narrative.
Short narrative.
That's supposed to describe literally everything that you do.
Yes.
Like that to me is never going to be a brief narrative. But that's why we want to talk about this writing process. Now, granted, the third, and I'll just say quickly, the third, fourth, and fifth steps, which we'll get to. Third is rated against a rubric that's provided. For some indicators, there's a rubric. Makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to see where you stack up compared with other schools. And then the fourth and the fifth are identifying your strong points within that standard, things that perhaps you could really brag about, that your school does exceptionally well, and then maybe some areas where we need to improve according to these indicators, and so you highlight those things. But we're really kind of narrowing in and focusing in on your response to these indicators and how you go about just kind of regurgitating on paper what your school does.
How you are doing the writing. And here to say, of course, Matt just said brag about. Earlier we said we start everything with a mission. We understand, know, claim, and others would say that we start with God's truth. We start with the Word, which is part of our mission. Praise God for that at Christian schools, which is why you're listening to us and not some other rando podcast about accreditations otherwise. And when we say brag, we think about bragging on what God has done in us. We think about what it is that God has allowed to be accomplished in these Christian schools, which make them noteworthy. And as we said before, even in our marketing podcast that came out recently, we need to do a better job of just showing people what it is that we do, because what it is that we do in education today is what others wish they had access to or don't realize that they have access to.
They do, yeah.
They do have access to it through us. So we're talking about writing. Okay, so again, to back up for those who may not have seen these before, when presented with the manual, when presented with the standards, the documentation that is to be created, think of it, there's 12 folders across your desk. One of those folders is standard number 1. And standard number 1 in AACS, philosophy and mission. So under this standard, it's going to be broken up into how many? Is it 12? Is it 14? There's 14, or how many indicators we got here?
Indicators?
I see 10 indicators.
Mm-hmm.
So there are 10 if the standard number 1 is philosophy and mission, it's broken down in 10 different subheadings, sections, paragraphs. And each of those are just descriptions. And under each description, there could be a rubric or not, but under those descriptions provided by the organization, the national organization, that's where we, with paper and pen, voice to text, typing away on the keyboard, whatever it is that we're doing, that's where we come in. That's where Matt comes in, and that's where we start doing our writing. So a quick one, just to show us, quote unquote, an easier one for Christian schools. 1.1. Matt, what does 1.1 say?
So the first indicator for philosophy and mission is the school publishes a statement of faith that is in agreement with the accrediting agency AACS statement of faith. Personnel affirm and support the statement of faith. Curriculum choices are in harmony with the statement of faith. So very much focused on that statement of faith. Do you have one? Does it connect with AACS? Obviously AACS maybe won't support a statement of faith that is completely contradictory to them. And then, are you showing, is it evident throughout your ministry that everybody is supportive of that statement of faith?
Including your curriculum. So we might, the rookie attacking the writing of these standards might look at this and say, the school publishes a statement of faith in agreement with the ACS statement of faith. Yes, we do.
Yes, we
Check.
do.
And that's the statement. Write out YESWEDO. Yes, we do.
If
and then
only.
Personnel affirm and support the statement of faith. Yes, they do. And that is not what's being called for here.
Right.
What's being called for here is
so wish it was, though.
Much deeper, right? We do wish it was that easy.
When you get to that point where
Take my word for it, friends.
You're just banging your head against the wall. You've been staring at these standards forever. The only thing is just like, yes, all caps, exclamation points. Like, I can't do this anymore. But that's not it.
But we think, so no, that's not what we write down. What we write down, and as any good teacher, you answer the question with wording from the question. Okay. Faith Baptist School, in Matt's case, publishes a statement of faith that is in agreement with the AACS statement of faith. And then the writer of this standard, which for standards 1, 2, and 3, and oftentimes those early ones, those are going to be major leaders in the ministry. For Matt, it's Matt. Those are probably going to be the people who are the leaders, and we could get into the other standards at a later time and whatnot. But these are the heavy hitters. If these aren't in alignment, we're not holding an accreditation visit anyway. But the leader sits down and they go and they dig up the statement of faith the school operates off of. And they dig up the AACS statement of faith, and they work through one by one the points of each to make sure that there is critical alignment between them. And then they go to the personnel files and they say, okay, how do we make sure that our people all affirm the statement of faith?
Right.
How do we do that?
And
when do we do that? Do we do that?
That is the key. The key question is how is this being done? And you're asking yourself that, and this, granted, is before you really start writing anything down.
Yes.
And that, to me, whenever I was going through this for the first time, I thought I could just sit down and answer these questions. Boom. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. That seemed the most straightforward, easy way. Even when establishing teams to start, going after the writing on this, just like we're all in agreement, right, that we do this. Yes, we do. Okay, cool. Write it down. Yes, we do.
Awesome. Yeah, we do. Yeah.
But the key question is not do you do it? It's how do you do it? And how is this? We're going to be talking about eventually because we're talking about documentation. How is this evidenced? Yeah. How is this seen? That is in fact the case. So starting from that point is, I think, critical.
So Matt's getting ready to take us to the standard we're going to talk about the rest of the time here. Yeah. But I also should say we're not saying, and and neither of the organizations we addressed earlier say this is a one-man show. This cannot be a one-man. If this accreditation is taken through the voice or the eyes of only one person, then it is worthless. And the leadership says that this has to be a organizational wide attempt to grow and to get better and to attempt to improve as unto the Lord and not unto men. Because if it is only one person, then we're accrediting one person, not the entire organization.
And when that person gets squished to jelly,
turn to
then
jelly on 50. Turn to jelly on 50. That should be one of my other sound prompts there. Make them into squeaky jelly on 50.
Now I want to point to this point. The AACS accreditation manual that you'll work through, and that'll be your best friend as you go through this.
Sure.
It makes that point that you as the administrator will be really tempted to just knock this all out yourself, but that cannot be the case.
You also kill yourself.
Yeah,
you won't sleep ever. You can't. There's
too much, way too
much. Yeah, it's too much.
So there is going to be a necessary step of identifying those individuals that are going to contribute, maybe even take over the vast majority of the narrative writing, while you as the administrator, of course, are going to be looking through and making sure everything is as it ought to be. But yeah, a big part of the writing process is also making sure you have that team of writers.
The Christian Principles Podcast is excited to share that we've joined the Herzog Foundation Podcast Network, a hub dedicated to advancing K-12 education and the Christian values we all share. The Herzog Foundation exists to catalyze and accelerate the development of quality Christ-centered K-12 education nationwide, helping families and culture flourish. One of their most impactful resources for Christian school leaders like us is the Herzog Foundation Institute. This program offers fully funded training events and retreats, enabling us to sharpen our skills without adding cost to our schools. Led by national experts, these events cover essential topics like marketing, donor development, and culture building, all tailored to the unique needs of Christian schools. Held monthly in Kansas City and other locations across the country, these events equip schools and their leaders with the tools and strategies they need to thrive. Don't miss the opportunity to explore all the Herzog Foundation has to offer. Together, we can strengthen Christ-centered education. Learn more at herzogfoundation.com. That's herzogfoundation.com.
Okay, so we're at the writing process part now, Matt. Where are you taking us to? And then let's talk about how you approached this with fear and trepidation, sweat and angst.
Yeah, I'm still not necessarily sure if it's all good, but yeah, we're going to assume it is. So I already unpacked 1.1. We're going to jump down to 1.7 just because it's pretty short and sweet, and looks like it's one of those really easy answer. Just yes.
Yeah.
So 1.7 is curriculum and instruction reflect the school's mission and philosophy. I mean, this whole standard is about mission and philosophy. So granted, as we jump between 1.1 and 1.7, you can understand that you're really diving into those two components. That the school has a mission, the school has a philosophy of education, and those are all developed and taken care of. So now with that being the case, your curriculum, which even we need to unpack that a little bit, and instruction.
We got time for that right now.
Reflect the school's mission and philosophy. So how are we going to, in a brief narrative, most nonsensical words in this whole process, demonstrate that is in fact the case, that our curriculum and our instruction reflect the school's mission and philosophy?
Well, it's at that point, with all those qualifiers done, that you would sit down with a keyboard in front of you or whatever you're going to do, and you would start writing. So let's not talk about the actual content, Matt.
No.
Let's talk about the process, Matt. Yep. When you took standard number 1, how did you begin the writing process for this?
Okay. For this one in particular, because it's dealing with the mission and philosophy, I'm always going to start there. And when we continue to say this, and we could be, whipping a dead horse, just because we say it so often. But, even as going through these indicators, I say, okay, what is the mission of my school? Here it is. I put it in front of me. I might even type it into, my document where I'm going to be writing my narrative. There it is. There's the mission. Philosophy, maybe a little bit more extensive than your mission, not quite
Definitely.
so cohesive, but so maybe like a summary of your philosophy. Also, stick it right there. And then you really have to say, okay, curriculum. Curriculum means more than just our textbooks. This is the entire program of what we're intending to relay to our students, what we're going to be sharing with them, what they're going to be learning, how they're going to be growing. And, from start to finish, whether you're starting preschool, whether you're starting kindergarten, all the way through 12th grade, every aspect of Faith Baptist School curriculum is in alignment with those two statements. Yes. Move on. Done.
And done. So it's curriculum, like you said. It is the books, and when you're walking through that process, Matt, I know we've talked about this so often, and as I helped with this process too, Matt, our approaches to the actual writing were a little bit different. There were times when you needed to sit and to think and to cry and to scream, I don't know what else I can say about this, or there is too much to say about this for all the digital paper in the world.
Yeah.
Walk us through that mindset. Walk us through that.
All right, so to get away from the whole yes, we do that, because we can't stop there, obviously. There can be the temptation, and I don't know if this is necessarily a bad thing, but it's also impossible. Let me just put it out there. You cannot do this for everything. But it would be possible to say, okay, here's my mission statement. And the first part of our mission statement is that we're a Christ-centered institution. So how can I take that portion of my mission statement and see that evidenced throughout our curriculum, that what we do is Christ-centered? Well, we obviously have Bible classes throughout our whole program. We have chapel. So, you've got those easy ones that might come to your mind right away. Yeah. But then in history class...
Write them down.
Oh, right.
Start writing them down.
Yeah, we're already writing, by the way. Yeah. We're already
what he's saying right now should be going into like rough draft. Maybe you're just the brainstorming step, and you're just
see. This is where Mark. This is where Mark and I work really well, because I like to just do what I'm doing right now. Just grab a microphone. I'm just going to start saying things, and then he is over there making the clicky noises on the computer. But then you take, your history, your social studies, or your language arts, and you're like, we're going to be teaching the alphabet by learning Bible verses. We're going to be learning parts of speech by taking apart, sentences that are Christ-centered. Sure. And if you clearly do that, then obviously you're evidencing that your curriculum reflects the school's mission.
And your instruction, if your teachers are praying with their students, if they're opening the day with a Bible reading, if they're making sure, I'm hitting the obvious ones, but if your teachers are enacting whatever your contract is, which says they're going to be following that statement of faith from higher, meaning that they understand that students are little sinners in the hands of a mighty God, which means we treat them as sinners, not as perfect kids who know everything, which that informs our philosophy of education, and that's a whole other topic. But even making sure that we say children are inheritance of the Lord unto their parents. We are in shared authority. We do not overcome the parents. All of those things go into our instruction and have to be evidenced here. They need to be talked about here.
And I think the key point is, don't overlook the obvious, and make sure you are writing it down, because it's really easy to just be like, well, of course, our curriculum matches our mission and philosophy, but that's the point of accreditation. Like, it's to not take anything for granted. It's to make sure you are evaluating, because you might, as you're going through that process, I just stopped with Christ-centered institution. We have a couple more words in our mission statement, not many, but a couple more.
Less than 25, that's for sure.
Which is great. But as you're going through that, you might unveil something that you're like, oh, we don't actually do that really well, or we don't have anything purposeful to accomplish that. And so in your narrative writing, and this is going to be the other thing I really want to make sure we include before we wrap up this episode with the writing process, is as you're unveiling these things that are perhaps exposed weaknesses, you're going to be really tempted to just fix everything. That is not a part of the writing process. So don't do that. Write it down, and if it's a glaring thing, maybe you want to come up with like a color code situation where you're highlighting. We do that really well, and we're supposed to be identifying our strengths. Let me highlight that in green. That's not a very good thing to do. So let me highlight that in red, and we'll come back to that later on and either identify it in our plan to improve, or it might be something that is easily fixed, and you can just go fix it and then delete that from your narrative because it doesn't exist anymore.
Sure. Let me say, as we go through this and we think about the writing process, you have in-house writing experts. You have English language arts teachers that from third grade on would tell you there is a process to the writing process. It exists. Yep. And so there ought to be drafting done. There ought to be final editing done. And when I approach these writings, I, as was noted even a few seconds ago, begin with the brainstorming. Okay, what are all the things I need to talk about to answer this question? And so that's where, when I started writing these, I would start with the brainstorming. Then I would go back to what Matt was saying. You go word by word through the indicator, and you offer evidence word by word. And for me, Matt noted, for me, that just maybe that flows differently for me. That flows more readily for me once I have the thought in mind. And so I am providing. We recognize the importance of guided learning, where structured lessons and clear objectives are paramount alongside of. So I am thinking through what is the obvious, and God be praised, I'm able to spit out a sentence which summarizes. Maybe that's where you need to find somebody, like Matt either found me or Matt found ways around, to take what is the expected, obvious, and to get it down. But please don't think, as any good writing teacher would tell you, that that's the end of it. Right. You then need to, I would say, take whatever time you're going to have per day to do this and do it every day. If it's a half an hour every day, you're going to write through it half an hour every day and stop and move on and come back. But once done, having gotten through all of the indicator, so we have the standard as the whole and the indicators of the parts. Once through the entire indicator, then it is a matter of, okay, I need to stop here, go to the next one, have somebody else read what I just wrote, and come back to it. Or I have to come back to it. Or better yet, if you have these teams that are called to be set up writing these standards, and hopefully you do to follow the process, the team leader, who's another voice, has team members who are different voices, all plugging into these standards, which are then turned over to whoever is the administrator or whoever is the end-all, be-all in the process, who then has to put their own voice and their own edits on it. So we're seeing multiple edits come through, which help the process. And that's so when we talk about the writing, it can't be one person. It's not going to be edited. My wife, and even I like to write this way. You write in a final edit way. That's not going to be the case with this. It will not be written in the final edit the first time through. Get it through your head. Think about it now. It needs to have lots of eyes on it, and you need to revisit it many times over, and for it to be ultimately what it needs to be.
Yeah. The only other thing that I really want to share on this episode when it comes to the writing process is, attacking these could be obviously extremely academic, but I think it's important that they do choose the term narrative. If you can convince yourself, like, instead of I'm going to sit down and just make a giant list of everything that we do, instead kind of turn it into I'm going to bring somebody into my school, I'm going to sit them down, and I'm going to sell them everything that we do, and I'm going to present it to them in that way.
Which is ultimately what we're doing, right? Yeah.
That is definitely the attack you want to take when it comes to answering these indicators of, Faith Baptist School does this, and here's how, and here's why, and all that kind of thing, instead of just, this is the publisher that we use, this is the teachers, this is their lesson plans, this is this is this, this is this, this is this. Like it, because then you can, Mark said this earlier, and I know we had a conversation with Dr. Leslie Nichols, who said when creating like her administrative manual and other things, she has it written that she can copy and paste it right into these indicators. Like you can use it in other ways. You can use it for advertisement. You can use it for other things. So if you think about and attack these narratives in that sense, you're going to be doing yourself a much larger service other than obviously just having it documented. That's huge. But think of it that way instead of just trying to knock these indicators out so that they're done. And then the accrediting team can review them and tell you, yes, they're good. No, they're not good. But yeah, I want us to be thinking, the voice, Mark's mentioned that a couple of times, getting that voice kind of uniform all throughout while also having multiple contributors can be extremely challenging when my mind thinks very differently than Mark's, and we have others in our leadership team that, again, think either similarly or even differently than the two of us. So to be able to pull all of that into one uniform narrative from start to finish is going to require that constant coming back to and revisiting, rehashing, redrafting, throughout the whole thing. So,
and as you did for your college papers, and as Matt's going to do for his doctoral papers coming up here soon. Lots of barfing on this episode. But as you do in those papers, so remember, utilize the tools that God has given you. Utilize the tools around you now to do it. Yeah. So much of my writings that I was tasked with were voice to text through a Google document. So Google Documents has a microphone in the top left corner, I believe it is, but you can click on that, and then I would do this literally rolling down the road. I would have somebody open up Google Documents for me, and I would just start talking in reference to what the standard was, knowing that I was going to go back and be reviewing all this. So it was partly brainstorming, partly getting things out of my head onto the paper that I knew would be useful for the indicator that I was working through under the standard. But use that and use whatever else you need to make sure you just start writing. Just start the process.
Get it down. Get it down. It's a lot easier to chop off something that exists than be staring at a blank page.
Absolutely.
That's what I was just we'll wrap up with this because a friend, I was letting them know that we were submitting our standards for review. And they're like, is that anything like, college when you have to just turn in a paper? I said, yeah, except you have 12 papers to turn in at the same time. Like, you can't do that.
So, representing the work of many, many people.
Yeah.
Lots of paid man hours. Matt, get us to our Christian Administrator Spotlight.
We are shouting out an administrator who knows this process full well. A building leader, a principal, I believe elementary principal, at Valley Forge Baptist Academy, Ashley Martin.
Ashley Martin, thank you so much for having joined us on the episode, which will be coming out just before this one, and talking through your accreditation site visit and how you were wiping the sweat off your brow, having been done with it. But Ashley, we also celebrate that this is your first year in Christian education, coming over from a public school after 18 years and seeing the light. But being able to come in and step into administration after your career as a instructional specialist, and we thank you for bringing that kind of knowledge, bringing your heart for Christ into Valley Forge and really into greater Christian education, as we've already been able to see you and see you spread that knowledge around. So I'm going to pray for you now, as I haven't had a chance to pray for somebody in a while. But Ashley, thank you for what you do. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you for bringing Ashley to VFBA and to greater Christian education in general. We thank you for her family. We thank you for the mind and the heart you gave her to serve and to serve well and to serve with professionalism and to serve with a heart to continue to improve. We gain that same heart, and with her ready smile and her joyful spirit, again, mirror the leader which she has been to so many students, faculty, and staff. We love you. Amen.
All right. Well, if applying for accreditation has really put you off because you're unsure of the process, stick with us. We're going to go through this process for you and make it a lot easier, because we'd love to see more Christian schools get that accreditation, get the recognition for the things we know they do really well.
Thanks for going with us today.
Before you go, please be sure to hit that follow button on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, on Spotify, be sure to tap the star icon near the top and select the number of stars you'd like to give us. We'd be so grateful for 5. On Apple Podcasts, scroll down to the ratings and review section and then tap write a review to share your thoughts of the podcast. Thank you.